Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my co-trustees and myself, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you to this evening's function. This function has been organized in association with the Forum of Free Enterprise, the Indian Merchants Chamber Young Leaders Forum, the Indira Institute of Business Management, the K.T. Somaya Institute of Management Studies and Research, the SIES College of Management, and the Wellinger Institute of Management. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to the office bearers of these associations and the members of these associations who are present here in such large numbers. This function is sponsored by ACC Limited, and we are truly grateful to them for their generous support. Nani Palkhivala joined the board of ACC in 1968, and he served as its chairman from 1969 to 1997, except for a brief spell when he was India's ambassador to the United States. 16th of January this year marks Nani's 90th birth anniversary, and it is wholly fitting that this year's function should be sponsored by ACC Limited, with which company he had such a long association. As usual, this evening's function will be in two parts. In the first part, we will have the presentation of the Nani Palkhivala Civil Liberties Award, and in the second part, we will have the 7th Nani Palkhivala Memorial Lecture to be delivered by Professor C.K. Prahalad. The Nani Palkhivala Civil Liberties Award has been instituted to recognize and honor those individuals and institutions who have done outstanding work in the preservation of civil liberties. The award carries a cash prize of Rs 1 lakh and a citation. Nominations for the award are invited through wide publicity in the national newspapers, and the nominations are judged by an independent jury of very eminent persons. The jury for this year's award consisted of Justice Venkatachalaya, former Chief Justice of India, and two other former judges of the Supreme Court, Justice Sujata Manohar and Justice Sam Variava. We are grateful to them for the time and effort they donated and devoted in adjudicating the nominations and in selecting the winner. We are also particularly grateful to Justice Manohar for her presence here today. I would now request our trustee and secretary of the trust, Shirin Barucha, to present flowers and a memento to Justice Manohar as a small token of our appreciation. I would now like to request Justice Manohar to address the gathering and announce the winner, and thereafter Shirin will read out the citation and the winner will respond. Justice Manohar.
Mr. Malakam, Ms. Barucha, and the distinguished audience. On behalf of the panel of judges, Justice Venkatachalaya, Justice Variava, and myself, I have great pleasure in announcing this year's Nani Palkhivala Civil Liberties Award 2010. The judges have unanimously decided to give this award to Ms. Maya Daruwala. Maya Daruwala has been working to promote human rights, civil liberties, and social justice for the last 2 decades and more. If I remember rightly, I met her for the first time many years ago when she was a program officer for South Asia at the Ford Foundation. I was then a judge of the Bombay High Court, and she came to discuss how one could promote civil liberties and constitutional values through law. Maya took her final bar examination after 10 years of marriage and 2 children. And this was in aid of her quest for equity and justice. She did practice law for a short time and then took up full-time work at the Ford Foundation. Since 1996, she is the executive director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, CHRI, which is an independent international NGO based in Delhi. It is mandated to promote human rights in the Commonwealth. Through its reports and periodic investigations, it has reported on the status of human rights in various Commonwealth countries, and it has advocated measures to protect civil liberties and prevent human rights abuses. Maya has focused on policing and human rights, issues causing much concern now, as more and more instances of fake encounters, police criminal nexus, and abuse of police powers comes to light. She has advocated police reforms and presented through CHRI a model Police Act 2006 to replace the ancient Police Act of 1861. Since then, they have interacted with civil society groups all over the country and campaigned for police reforms. Access to justice and prison reforms are other important issues directly linked to civil liberties. Maya has worked and written extensively on these issues. She has worked to help victims of Gujarat riots in their fight for justice. And in Chhattisgarh, I believe, she has promoted community policing and training of the police. So let me extend, on behalf of the panel of judges, myself, and all of you, our hearty congratulations to Maya Daruwala. At this difficult time, when security concerns tend to override civil liberties, we need an informed dialogue within the civil society and between civil society and lawgivers or law enforcers so that we can strike a right balance between the two. We need the experience of organizations working for civil liberties to decide what is that right balance. For this purpose, the civil liberties organizations need to be more observant, more analytical, and more forthcoming to share their findings with those of others working in the field. I hope this award will encourage those working in this vital area and help them to analyze their experiences and advocate appropriate steps for promotion and protection of civil liberties in this difficult time here and elsewhere. Nani Palkhivala had devoted his entire life campaigning for civil liberties, fundamental freedoms, human rights, constitutional and national values, and a corruption-free society, where alone these rights and values can exist. We should use this occasion to remind ourselves of these commitments to rights and values and work to promote greater commitment to these fundamental values in our country. Thank you very much.
Citation presented by the Nani Palkhivala Memorial Trust, Award for the Protection and Preservation of Civil Liberties 2009 to Maya Daruwala. Maya Daruwala's life and work would make a fine example to persons, particularly to women, who usually walk only the beaten track. After 10 years of marriage and 2 children, she became a barrister from Lincoln's Inn, London. Maya knew that both her vocation and avocation had come together from the first time when she opened a law book and found echoed in it her own unspoken, passionate beliefs in justice and equity. Maya has lived and studied in England, Singapore, and Sri Lanka, but began practicing in the courts in India only when she returned to Delhi in 1986. She left this to work full-time as Program Officer for Rights and Social Justice for India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka at the Ford Foundation, Delhi. The position gave her an overview of the many problems that beset the realization of rights in South Asia and convinced her that the way to make people realize their rights was to assist them to understand their rights, to find their voice, and learn how to seek justice. If people are not aware of their rights and civil liberties, no advance is possible, especially when an obdurate bureaucracy is ranged against them. Since 1996, Maya has been the Honorary Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, CHRI, which is an international NGO which works for the practical realization of human rights and civil liberties across the Commonwealth, with special focus on South Asia and India. Over these years, she has built up CHRI with emphasis on areas that are foundational in ensuring civil liberties, such as access to information and to justice, as these are areas of struggle which, if realized, form the base which ensures all other rights. Maya has been one of the very early advocates of the Right to Information Act for India. Guided by Maya, CHRI worked to ensure that the Indian law was strong and progressive. Today, this law is recognized as one of the best acts of its kind in the world. CHRI has worked tirelessly to broadcast this act and protect it from attempts at dilution. It is not for nothing that this law has been called the oxygen of democracy. It is now working its magic across the country from the highest echelon of government and the courts to the common man. Through training modules for government functionaries and a slew of publications and films in many languages, in the simplest format, CHRI has reached out to the maximum number of people, opening their eyes to their rights and liberties, which are often cloaked in secrecy by the powers that be. For over a decade, Maya has championed the idea of modernizing the outdated policing systems in the Commonwealth, most especially in India. Maya has long advocated that it is vital that democracies have policing systems that are answerable to the law and not to the persons in power. She has plowed a lonely furrow to persuade the authorities of the necessity for police reform. Under Maya, CHRI has been part of drafting the Government of India's Model Police Act and is presently monitoring government's compliance with the Supreme Court's directions, ordering governments to put in place institutions that will reform policing. As a means of promoting the value of human rights in the delivery of justice, Maya has designed and conducted seminars and workshops for judges from across South Asia, including the Supreme Court of India, the High Courts of Mumbai, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, and the district courts. At the Commonwealth level, Maya holds parallel civil society meetings at each Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which draw the attention of heads of state to the situation of human rights across the Commonwealth, the value of the work of human rights defenders, and the dangers they face, which today touches a raw nerve in our country. Maya has lent her expertise and energies to many organizations working to further human rights and civil liberties in India and abroad. She has been chair of the Minorities' Rights Group, London, chair of the People's Watch, Tamil Nadu, which has created a movement for human rights education in schools, particularly targeting teachers, and chair of MARG, a Delhi-based NGO which works to spread legal literacy, particularly for women. She is on the board of the International Women's Health Coalition, New York, an external advisor for the World Bank's governance and anti-corruption task force in Washington, and is on the board of Open Society's Justice Worldwide initiative. For all her achievements, her sterling efforts and work done both selflessly and entirely voluntarily, the Nani Palkhivala Trust recognizes and lauds this special Indian. To adapt the words of the poet Robert Frost, she took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard so much about me that I hope I really don't disappoint you in life and in person. Actually, I didn't know I did so much until I heard it. Trustees of the Nani Palkhivala Trust, judges, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot begin to tell you how delighted I am to get this award, to receive the Nani Palkhivala Award. Now, people will always say this at the beginning of a speech, and it sounds like a formality, but you won't realize how much I really how much I really want this award, because the last award I got was in class 10 when I won the prize for biology. So now I'm looking forward to the next 50 years when somebody will think of giving me another prize. The citation has been very kind to me, and I think exaggerated some of the things that we do. I recall meeting a very holy man about a year and a half ago, and he was asking me about police reform. I go and talk all over the country to anybody who will listen to me about police reform. And he said to me, कितने साल हो गए जो आप पुलिस रिफॉर्म में काम कर रहे हैं? And I said, 12 साल हो गए हैं. And he looked at me and said, अभी कुछ नहीं हुआ? क्या कर रहे हो तुम? And I think that really sums it up. The striving, the effort, the energy that you have to put in. And sometimes you wake up in the morning and think you're absolutely wrong, you've got the wrong end of the stick, and it's really hard to go on. But as I said, the citation has been very kind to me, and I could not have done this much work or persevered for so long, and that is why this award means so much, because it recognizes perhaps not the success, but the perseverance of many people like myself. And for this, I have to thank my board for standing behind me at the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. And more than the board even, and I say this because I see many young people in the audience, more than the board, it is the very young, very committed, very hardworking young people who work with me. They slog day after day on something that many of their families don't understand or approve of, and certainly that public at large doesn't quite get. And yet they slog very, very hard and are a real inspiration to me. As you heard, I work on issues of access to justice, particularly through police reform and prison reform, in the belief and access to information, in the belief that these two things, if they are improved, the participation of, informed participation of people in public life, in their development, in democracy, and the gateway to justice, which is so close just now, which is policing, and being able to get a remedy for your right. If these things are put together, there will be no country to touch India and no people more contented than the Indian people. And I simply cannot understand why there is so much resistance to it. At the moment, there is some momentum gained for police reform. But I have to say, as I say to very often to people, that in the 12 years of effort, energy, not only mine, but all sorts of other organizations, including PCGT, the MKSS, the Human Rights Forum in Andhra Pradesh, PUCL, PUDR, all of these people who have been working in this area, despite their sustained efforts, the momentum really has come from catastrophic events such as 26/11. When you think about it, Mr. Kasab has done more for police reform than I have. And this is a bad thing. This is a bad thing. In the context of policing, we must not think of the cataclysmic event which happens once. We must think of the daily, everyday tragedies that overtake all sorts of extremely poor people who cannot reach out to justice. It is for them that we must work. It is the ordinary, everyday policing that has to get better. And this can only happen if there is a democratic policing for a democratic country. It doesn't mean only changing laws. Yes, indeed, I was part of the Model Police Act that the government of India had asked to be developed. The act is okay, but it needs a lot of improvement. But that is not the issue. The issue is, even under today's laws, that policing must have a quality which it does not have today. And this is killing us. We have to stand up for it. Talking about standing up for things, we have to change the police. We have to change the whole dialogue from let us arm the police to let us change the police. Now, one of the other things that I am involved in is, and with CHRI, is that we champion the right to information. And you have heard Ms. Bharucha talking about the magic that it is weaving across the country. But that magic is being bought with people's lives, because there are people who are deeply resisting the idea of openness in government, and because they have so much invested in corruption, in favoritism, in bias, that there is a great deal of resistance. This morning I opened the papers only to see that a man called Satish, now look at me, I've forgotten his name. Satish Sethi, all of you know about it, you've read about it. Then we turned the page. But Mr. Shetty was a champion of right to information. 5 days ago in your own city, you read about Naina Katpalia of Open Spaces, whose house was entered and she was shot at. We cannot let this happen. While there are organizations who are doing the kind of work I am, the importance of this prize lies in the recognition by an institution that civil liberties is something worth supporting, and that civil liberties, the freedom to move around, the freedom to associate, the freedom to speak, the right to a fair trial, the right to protection, all of these belong to you, and that we must work for it. I'm sorry, I have to sound a slightly sour note when I say that the rich usually take civil liberties for granted. They have money, they have influence, they have reach. And the poor are too poor to demand their civil liberties. They know all about the law because the law oppresses them. But to do something about it requires people like you and me. That is why the burden of working for this must fall squarely on us, and we must do whatever it is that is needed. But the strange and wonderful fact about India is that it is indeed the poor who very often gather together, alone and apart, to work for civil liberties. India is lauded abroad for its civil liberties movements and for the organizations that it has created and for the civil liberties space that is available in India. But this work is often misunderstood. Government is often too restrictive, too uncooperative, closing spaces, asking for licenses, asking for every kind of constraining the space for civil liberties actors. What I say there is, please don't kill the messenger. We are not doing wrong. We are on the side of law. We are on the side of constitution. By the very work we do not hold arms. We use the constitutional availability of all the remedies to take further the idea of India. So it is in this regard that I seek that we should be working many, many more, especially young people who are idealistic and want to do this work. Often they don't know where to go to do this work. And there are places, and it's worth seeking out partners to do this. Now, with the money that you heard, that the Nani Palkhivala, I have made a call to arms. And I would like to say that I should be the first to do something about it. And with the money that you have so graciously given me, what I would like to do is to use this in the defense of people who defend civil liberties and who are oppressed, intimidated, tortured and killed. Someone has to defend them, and if this is a practical way of doing it, I'd like to do it. Once again, I would like to thank you for the honor. I am really proud to be in the company of people like Aruna Roy, Sailesh Gandhi, Tista Setalvad, the PCGT Trust, and the PUCL, and I also feel somewhat, though very elevated, also very unworthy. In fact, I feel a little bit like the man who, on hearing that Mr. Obama had received the Nobel Prize, wrote to the Times in London and said, "Dear sir, I would like to have the Nobel Prize for Literature for the books that I have not yet written, but would like to write." Ladies and gentlemen, I greatly value this prize, not because it honors one, but because it recognizes the work of so many. In the years to come, it will inspire me to do better, to strive harder, to reach for higher ground, and I hope that you will join me in this endeavor. After all that we can do is try. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to part 2 of our program this evening, namely the 7th Nani Palkhivala Memorial Lecture. To many, Nani's claim to posterity rests on the recognition that he was perhaps India's finest tax expert and one of our most outstanding constitutional jurists whose contribution to the preservation of our Constitution has been unparalleled. However great as these achievements were, they do scant justice to the fact that Nani was an even more complete man. Though he was not an industrialist, he guided the destinies of many large enterprises with great distinction. Though he was not an economist, he spoke and wrote with great erudition on matters concerning our economy. In fact, his outstanding contribution to the development of economic thought was that he advocated many propositions which we today take for granted, but which when made were opposed to prevailing government policies and prevalent economic thinking, and it needed courage to advance them at that time. Though he was not an educationist, he was invited by a large number of universities, both in India and abroad, to give convocation addresses, and these addresses highlight his deep scholarship, his profound wisdom, and his great concern for the young. Though he was not a theologist, he was invited by the Sri Venkataswamy University at Tirupur to give a series of lectures which were later published in the form of a book titled India's Priceless Heritage, which became an instant success. It is therefore impossible to assign a label to Nani, but perhaps the best we can do is to say that he was an outstanding thinker, a person who possessed deep humanity, and a great Indian. These qualities can well be ascribed to our speaker of the evening. And it is wholly appropriate that in the year of Nani's 90th birth anniversary, the 7th Nani Palkhivala Memorial Lecture should be delivered by an individual who has been rightly described by Business Week in the US as perhaps the most influential thinker in business strategy today. Professor C.K. Prahalad was educated at Madras University and the IIM Ahmedabad, and later obtained his doctorate from Harvard Business School. He has taught at IIM Ahmedabad and the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan, where he is currently a distinguished university professor. He is the author of a number of well-known works in corporate strategy, including several international bestsellers. In every major survey in the United States for over 10 years, he has been ranked as among the top 10 management thinkers in the country. He is a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission of the United Nations on Private Sector and Development, and is the first recipient of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Award in 2000 for his contribution to management and public administration. We are indeed very fortunate that Professor Prahalad has accepted our invitation to deliver the 7th Nani Palkhivala Memorial Lecture. His subject is Sampurna Azadi, the unfinished agenda. The very fact that we have this audience in this large numbers, and the fact that we have, in addition to this packed hall, at least about 300 other persons sitting outside with video conferencing which we have arranged, is testimony to the keen interest and the anticipation with which we are looking forward to listen to Professor Prahalad. Before I request Professor Prahalad to deliver the lecture, I would request Shirin Bharucha to offer flowers to Professor Prahalad. And also to offer flowers to Mrs. Prahalad. As a token of our respect and appreciation. I give you Professor Prahalad.
Mr. Malagam, Mr. Deepak Parekh, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great honor and a privilege to be asked to deliver the 7th Nani Palkhivala Memorial Lecture. I approach it with great humility as one who does not have any intellectual grounding in either political science or legal doctrine. I'm an unlikely candidate to deliver this lecture. But Mr. Malagam and Mr. Deepak Parekh somewhat convinced me to accept this considerable task. So here I am. I have a fairly simple agenda for today. Mr. Palkhivala will always be known as one who fought to preserve the fundamental freedoms guaranteed by our Constitution. He reminded us that the Parliament is a creature of the Constitution and not the master of it. And therefore, the Parliament does not have the authority to change the basic structure of the Constitution. His work preserved the institutional framework that guarantees freedom for all people. We, the people, and not we, the Parliament, continue to be the guiding light in this country. All Indians are indebted to him for this contribution. However, the reality of India in 2010 is a far cry from the guiding principles set forth in the Constitution. Every constitutional principle, and I mean every constitutional principle, is violated on a massive scale across the country. I have no illusions about the challenges of ensuring that our ideals are reflected in the actual conduct of daily life. But our history and our future as a nation demand no less. And in order to achieve these aims and challenge entrenched behavior and expectations, I don't think new laws or even better enforcement alone are the answer. We must realize that achieving social justice in a complex polity such as India requires socio-political innovations of a massive scale. We have to reimagine politics and governance as it is practiced in India. We have to address the issues before us: corruption, separatism, and inequality by working to change the circumstances that create them. I need to look no further than India's struggle for independence to know that this country is more than capable of conceiving and executing massive social innovation, confronting military might with nonviolent resistance. Satyagraha was the epitome of socio-political innovation. Similarly, social justice in India today cannot be achieved through exhortation or minor band-aids to an administrative structure created 100 years ago for colonial administration. India needs and deserves a massive dose of fundamental innovations in how it is governed and how it is administered. Indians must step forward and accept the responsibility to innovate. The changes that I'm proposing today are far more modest than those delivered to us by prior generations. But where they fought to create a nation, we must innovate today because nothing less than the survival of India as one nation may be at stake. No other society in the world has tried to change a system as large and as complex. What India needs are not best practices from somewhere outside India or even within India. India needs next practices. India must have the courage to chart its own path. I plan to discuss this extraordinary opportunity for fundamental innovations in governance in India in 3 parts. First, and this is the hard part for me, I have to deal with the basic structure of the Constitution and its violation in practice. We have to be honest. This will provide us a baseline understanding of the extent of deterioration in the realization of the basic guarantees of the Constitution, and therefore the urgency for innovations in governance. In part 2, I want to look at the choices open to India. India can, of course, continue to stay on course. I believe India is at an inflection point. The Naxalite insurgency is just the tip of the iceberg. India must choose the path of change and innovation, as difficult as it might be. Creating a shared vision will be my third part. We must have a point of view of India we want to create and how to convert the principles enshrined in the Constitution into reality. I would like to call this Sampurna Azadi. The basic structure of the Constitution guarantees just Sampurna Swaraj. We have to work hard to guarantee Sampurna Azadi. I will outline some innovations that can help in the process of arresting the rapid deterioration in governance and move towards realizing social justice for all in a reasonable period of time. To start with, what is happening to our Constitution and in practice? I'd like to start by saying the essential architecture of the Constitution is based on 5 guiding principles: rule of law, democracy, secularism, federalism, and judicial review. These basic building blocks are accepted in principle. However, the political and administrative systems, in essence, have increasingly rendered them ineffective. It is important to recognize the difference, as Professor Amartya Sen points out, between Niti and Nyaya. Niti refers to the institutional, proprietary, and behavioral correctness, and Nyaya, the realized justice in practice. Maturation as a democracy, one would have expected, would strengthen these building blocks of the Constitution and improve access to justice in practice. It has not happened in India yet. But also, the concept of social justice is a moving target. As Indians get better educated, better connected, and better able to understand their rights, they also become more sensitive to injustice. Aspirations in India may also be outstripping reality. India may have eliminated many of the worst forms of discrimination rampant during the early 20th century. However, there is now a greater recognition of injustice. Let us start by looking at some data, difficult as it might be. Let me start with the rule of law. India's commitment to the rule of law during the last 50 years is unflattering, to say the least. There has been a lot of debate recently on the delays in dispensing justice. There are 30 million cases pending in Indian courts, 53,000 in the Supreme Court, 4 million in high courts, and 27 million in subordinate courts. There has been a significant increase in pending cases, as much as 130% for the Supreme Court during the period 2000 to 2009. Over 25% of the cases in high courts have been pending for over 10 years. Given these delays, it is difficult to understand why over 23% of Supreme Court, 26% for the High Court, and 18% for the subordinate court positions that have been approved have remained unfilled. India's judge-to-population ratio is very low at 12.5 per million people, compared to 104 in the United States. The Law Commission of India, as early as 1987, recommended that the ratio be raised from 10.5 at that time to 50 immediately and to 100 by 2000. A parliamentary standing committee reinforced this recommendation in 2002, but the ratio has not changed. neither have the positions that have been approved been filled. While there is a significant backlog, the number of cases filed is still registering an upward climb. The increase in the load of public interest litigation is also adding to the problem. Is this a measure of Indians' unshakable belief in the rule of law? It's an interesting hypothesis. Or alternatively, or do delays create an incentive to file more cases? I think we ought to ask this question very seriously. The problem or poor management of the judicial system is well known and well researched. The solutions are also well known. Therefore, as citizens, we have to ask, why this apathy? And in fact, I do not know of many questions in India which have been as well researched and well documented. Corruption in the judicial and police system is also endemic. To start with, it is estimated that over 70% of prisoners in Indian jails are under trials. Even senior high court judges are seen as corrupt. The corruption in police is also well documented. India rates very poorly in the study by Transparency International. Over 77% of Indians believe that the system is very corrupt. That puts us in the same league as Pakistan and Bangladesh. Not good company to keep. More importantly, 1 in 3 who have had any contact with the police or the judiciary said that they had to pay a bribe. This is gross violation of the first building block of the Constitution. The implications of this level of corruption are twofold. It ensures that the citizens are denied their basic right guaranteed by the Constitution. More importantly, this is also an implicit tax on the poor. We do not recognize corruption is an implicit tax on the poor. Not only is it an implicit tax, but it is getting access to what is their right, be it a ration card or a birth certificate, should not cost anything. But it does in reality. Corruption is so pervasive, it touches all citizens. Secondly, corruption and the subversion of the rule of law have a significant influence on the economic development of the country. Dr. Manmohan Singh, our Prime Minister, and Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, Finance Minister, have openly acknowledged the impact of corruption on development. Their estimates are 1 to 2%, and I think it's a gross underestimation. Still, it is acknowledged. Violation of the rule of law subverts the basic transaction governance capacity of a country, or its ability to enforce explicit and implicit contracts between citizens and institutions, including the government. A shift in political ideology, market-based systems in contrast to central planning, and socialism is not enough. The capacity for transaction governance is crucial. Consider India and China, and I've looked at it from 1995. While China was in the process of trying to change the opaque and idiosyncratic process of contract enforcement so that they can facilitate foreign direct investment, India was regressing. From a great start in 1947, the transaction governance capacity significantly regressed in India. The political process has systematically compromised the freedom of institutions, judiciary, the executive branch, the police, businesses, and I dare say, including the media. It is time for this trend to be arrested and the trajectory changed. Democracy is another building block of our Constitution. India can justly be proud of the record as a democracy. Over 60 years, India has held national elections over 15 times. More than 700 million people are eligible to vote, and about 70% go to the polls, which is a very good number. The Election Commission has remained mostly independent. During 2004 and 2009 elections, the polling was totally electronic, which significantly reduced the opportunity for vote tampering. However, coalition politics creates its own dynamic in governance. It creates alliances without principles. That is what coalition politics is about. The first coalition government in 1977 was formed by Mrs. Indira Gandhi. That was a combination, and I want you to think for a minute, what is the logic in this combination? Combination in Indian National Congress, Indira, the Anna Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, the Communist Party of India, the Jammu and Kashmir National Conference, the Indian Union Muslim League, the Kerala Congress Revolutionary Socialist Party, and 2 independents. That was the coalition. She was defeated in the elections that year, and Mr. Morarji Desai of the Janata Dal formed a government of 5 opposition parties. In 1996, when the government led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee lasted only 13 days, a new attempt was made to form a government called the United Front under Mr. Deve Gowda, a 14-party coalition. In 1997, Inder Kumar Gujral formed a 16-party United Front coalition. This pattern of coalitions of convenience continues both at the center and in many of the states. Fragmentation of the polity at the national and state levels extracts its own price. Public policy does not necessarily reflect the will of the majority. Small groups can have disproportionate influence. Economic reforms can be held hostage by a very small minority. It is also difficult for the government to discipline and hold accountable ministers who recognize their power to destabilize the government. In an interesting twist, coalition governments have in reality turned public policy in India to reflect the will of the minority, the few who control swing votes. That is a tragedy. The demand for division of states such as Telangana or Bodoland or Gurkhaland is yet another example of fragmentation. There is an argument for smaller states to improve governance, and I recognize it. However, in a climate of identity politics, there is also a danger. Dr. Ambedkar was very prescient. In his speech introducing the Constitution, he had this to say, and I quote, "Will history repeat itself? It is this thought which fills me with anxiety. This anxiety is deepened by the realization of the fact that in addition to our old enemies in the form of castes and creeds, we are going to have many political parties with diverse and opposing political creeds. Will Indians place the country above their creed, or will they place their creed above the country? I do not know, but this much is certain, that if the parties place creed above country, our independence will be put in jeopardy a second time and probably lost forever." I think it's important to reflect on how very, very thoughtful his view of what can happen. Coalition politics is proving that his anxiety was probably appropriate. Block voting on the basis of caste and local identity politics may continue to render coalition politics a reality. The media have even coined a new term, coalition math. Consider the coalition process in Jharkhand just this month. The alliances have no logic except to form a government with Mr. Soren as chief minister out of a hung parliament. However, the improved mandate of the Congress party in the most recent election provides hope that unprincipled coalitions of convenience may become, and it's a hope, may become a passing phase in the march of Indian democracy. Secularism is the third building block, and secularism is an age-old tradition in India. Secularism never meant discarding religion. In India, it meant that the state will be equidistant from all religions, but each one is free to practice his or her religion without any interference from the state. Emperor Ashoka recognized this more than 2,200 years ago. In his edicts, his beliefs about religions are well documented. 1, all religions should reside everywhere, for all of them desire self-control and purity of heart. That is the Rock Edict number 7. Contact between religions is good. One should listen to. I want you to hear what he had to say. One should listen to and respect the doctrines professed by others. Beloved of the gods, King Hippolytus desires that all should be well learned in the good doctrines of other religions. Similarly, Akbar in 1590 recognized that India is too complex to be governed without secularism. He married into Hindu royal families, made Rajputs his generals, and most importantly ensured that throughout his kingdom there was religious tolerance. He said that the duty of the state included making sure that no man should be interfered with on account of his religion, and anyone was to be allowed to go over to any religion he pleased. These are the traditions that we have to live by. The framers of the Constitution recognized the essential nature of secularism in India. It is not the negation of religion, but equal treatment of all religions under law. Sectarian violence, sporadic as well as large-scale violence, has been happening with disturbing frequency during the last 30 years. The Sikh riots in '84, Ayodhya and Babri Mosque in '92, Godhra and Ahmedabad riots in 2002 were significant blots on Indian character. More disturbing is the increasing incidence of religious conflicts that do not get public attention. For example, during 89-90, more than 300,000 Kashmiri Pandits left the valley under threat of death. The anti-Christian violence is also spreading. Between 1964 and 96, for more than 30 years, there are only 38 reported cases. In 1998, there were 90. And over the years, it is more than 100 incidents per year. Be it Northeast, Jammu and Kashmir, the Hindi heartland, or Gujarat, the tensions between religious and caste groups are palpable. Given India's composition, Indians must learn to live together. The reality is that the politics of group rights may be leading country in the opposite direction, and due to further fragmentation. At the birth of the Republic in 1950, the government reserved 22.5% of government jobs and seats in education institutions for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes.